Hello everyone, this is Joshua Smith of Apollo's Artifacts. It is summer 2018. I thought I would take the opportunity over the next two episodes to look at two different very bizarre, very interesting conspiracy documents that have made the rounds for many years now. The first one will be Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, which was supposedly written in 1979, but first got broad circulation in William Cooper's book, Behold a Pale Horse, in 1991, which was kind of a conspiracy theorist's underground bestseller book. And the other one is The Report from Iron Mountain, first written supposedly in 1966, which has made the rounds obviously now for more than 50 years. I'm old enough now to have seen conspiracy theories go through a number of different cycles over time. Of course, you can stretch all the way back to JFK in the matter of, who shot him and why and how that took place and whatnot. But you can move forward really and look at the tenure of Ronald Reagan and see how much the concern centered around Rex 84, which was the idea of using the military to round people up and putting them into FEMA camps for re-education or extermination and so on. Under Clinton, Clinton added a lot of fuel to the fire for the people who thought that he was going to come after patriots and militia members and all this sort of stuff through the events that took place at Ruby Ridge and Waco. Under Bush, obviously, the big thing was 9/11. Was 9/11 an inside job? Did they allow it to happen or make it happen? So on and so forth. For Obama, it was the birth certificate issue, and then whether or not he would actually relinquish power at the end. There were a lot of people who thought that he would not go willingly into that good night. And really, they almost didn't, considering some of the things that have taken place since. And then, of course, under Trump, it's obviously all just been Russia. Putin controls him like some kind of a puppet and all this sort of stuff. So we've all seen this variety of charges go back and forth. Of course, people who are in their 20s, they don't really know any of this kind of stuff. And, the Trump thing is basically the only thing that they know about. But this kind of stuff has been going on for a really long time. But in terms of Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, a lot of people will recognize this title, or at least think that it seems vaguely familiar. One of the reasons for that could be, if they have not ever been exposed to any of the conspiracy material on it, is they may have seen the X-Files film in 1998 called Fight the Future. And there was a character introduced in that by the name of Dr. Alvin Kurzweil. And Kurzweil's character was sort of an amalgam of Bill Cooper and Ray Kurzweil. And Bill Cooper is not exactly someone who would be described as a dapper gentleman, but the version of the character who appeared in the film indeed was. So I think that's part of where they got the image from Ray Kurzweil and blended that in together. Now, Ray Kurzweil, of course, is a futurist or a futurologist. He writes about the singularity, artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and all this sort of stuff. And Bill Cooper's book, Behold a Pale Horse, was sort of replicated within the film when the character of Agent Mulder mentions the titles of Alvin Kurzweil's films that he has written in the film. One of them was called The Four Horsemen of the Global Domination Conspiracy, and the other one was called Countdown to the Apocalypse, which Mulder's character basically just laughs off and thinks are ridiculous because he's seen so many other things, in the lead up to this meeting with Kurzweil himself, that he just dismisses him as kind of a joke and a kook and all this sort of stuff. But the most interesting thing about the scene when they meet is that Kurzweil's character tells Mulder that the virus that's being worked on within the mythology of the show and the film series and whatnot is actually a silent weapon for a quiet war.
What was it? When we were young men in the military, your father and I were recruited for a project. They told us it was biological warfare or a virus.
What killed those men?
What killed them, I won't even write about. We have no context for what killed those men, or any appreciation of the scale at which it'll be unleashed in the future.
A plague?
A plague to end all plagues, Agent Mulder. A silent weapon for a quiet war. The systematic release of an indiscriminate organism for which the men who will bring it on still have no cure. They've been working on this for 50 years. While the rest of the world have been fighting gooks and commies, these men have been secretly negotiating a planned Armageddon.
Negotiating with whom?
I think you know. The timetable has been set. It'll happen on a holiday when people are away from their homes. The president will declare a state of emergency, at which time all government, all federal agencies will come under the power of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, the secret government.
And then that gets us back to the title of this document. The provenance of the document itself has been discussed over the years with lots of controversy. Some people have said that it was actually authored by the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. There was a man who was in prison named Hartford Van Dyke who claimed credit for having been the original author of the text. Some people try to say that Bill Cooper wrote it. I certainly don't believe that. I think that Bill Cooper thought that the document was indeed real and that he believed the contents of it and that these things were actually being planned and put into action and all this sort of stuff. But I don't think that Bill himself even was capable of this. I know that he was a naval intelligence officer and all that sort of stuff, but the material in here is rather arcane. There's all kinds of formula and whatnot. There are at least 3 different versions of this document, which I will link all those below so that you can compare them for yourselves and see what you think of it. It's very, very odd to say the least. This document was said to have been a top secret document, supposedly discovered by a Boeing employee who had bought a whole bunch of Xerox machine copiers or something like that, and he found the original version of it in there or something. But, what are some of the first things that pop to mind when you hear silent weapons for quiet wars? Obviously, you think of viruses, bacteria, possibly EMP, electromagnetic pulse, GMOs, smart dust, nanotechnology, frequencies that could be used against people, ELF and VLF waves and all this sort of thing. These are very common things that have been discussed over the years. At least that was up until the 90s and early 2000s. Now people talk a lot more about Agenda 21, smart meters, and 5G, which is going to be going in all over the place. And a lot of people are really concerned about the effects that will have long-term on humans. Other people said instead of this document having a single author, that it was actually authored by multiple people at, for instance, the Tavistock Institute or SRI or the Rand Institute, which are also common subjects of discussion among conspiracy circles and whatnot. There's also a third document that I may end up covering. It often gets discussed along with Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars and the report from Iron Mountain, and it's sometimes referred to just as the NASA War document, but I think the title of it was NASA, the End of Mankind or something like this. I'll try to find that one, and maybe we'll talk about that after I cover these other two. But I'll start reading here now from Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. Top Secret, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, an introductory programming manual, Operations Research Technical Manual TMSW 7905.1. Welcome aboard. This publication marks the 25th anniversary of the Third World War, called the Quiet War, being conducted using subjective biological warfare fought with quiet weapons. And if that would be the 25th anniversary, that would take it back to 1954, which presumably refers to the original meeting at the Hotel de Bilderberg, which is where the Bilderberg Group gets its name and all of that, just so you know that for reference purposes. This book contains an introductory description of this war, its strategies, and its weaponry. May 1979. Security. It is patently impossible to discuss social engineering or the automation of a society, i.e. the engineering of social automation systems, silent weapons on a national or worldwide scale, without implying extensive objectives of social control and destruction of human life, i.e. slavery and genocide. This manual is in itself an analog declaration of intent. Such a writing must be secured from public scrutiny, otherwise it might be recognized as a technically formal declaration of domestic war. Furthermore, whenever any person or group of persons in a position of great power and without full knowledge and consent of the public uses such knowledge and methodology for economic conquest, it must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between said person or group of persons and the public. I find that phrase very strange. Why would you even put that in a document like this? Why would you even care to put that in there, unless it was for public consumption? The solution of today's problems requires an approach which is ruthlessly candid and with no agonizing over religious, moral, or cultural values. You have qualified for this project because of your ability to look at human society with cold objectivity and yet analyze and discuss your observations and conclusions with others of similar intellectual capacity without a loss of discretion or humility. Such virtues are exercised in your own best interest. Do not deviate from them. Now, I'll also point out here that the report from Iron Mountain, for instance, is a rather well-known hoax. A lot of the people in the conspiracy circles will just say that, well, the idea that it's a hoax is a cover story so that you don't take the material seriously and whatnot, and you'll just dismiss it or not read it at all. But that's just neither here nor there. Historical introduction. Silent weapon technology has evolved from operations research, OR, a strategic and tactical methodology developed under the military management in England during World War II. The original purpose of operations research was to study the strategic and tactical problems of air and land defense with the objective of effective use of limited military resources against foreign enemies, i.e. logistics. It was soon recognized by those in positions of power that the same methods might be useful for totally controlling a society. Better tools were necessary. Social engineering, the analysis and automation of a society, requires the correlation of great amounts of constantly changing economic information, data. So a high-speed computerized data processing system was necessary which could race ahead of the society and predict when society would arrive for capitulation. Relay computers were too slow, but the electronic computer invented in 1946 by J. Presper Eckert and John W. Mauchly filled the bill. The next breakthrough was the development of the simplex method of linear programming in 1947 by the mathematician George B. Dantzig. Then, in 1948, the transistor, invented by J. Bardeen, W. H. Brattain, and W. Shockley, promised great expansion of the computer field by reducing space and power requirements. With these three inventions under their direction, those in positions of power strongly suspected that it was possible for them to control the whole world with the push of a button. Immediately, the Rockefeller Foundation got in on the ground floor by making a 4-year grant to Harvard College, funding the Harvard Economic Research Project for the study of the structure of the American economy. 1 year later, in 1949, the United States Air Force joined in. In 1952, the original grant period terminated and a high-level meeting of the elite was held to determine the next phase of social operations research. The Harvard Project had been very fruitful, as is borne out in the publication of some of its results in 1953, suggesting the feasibility of economic or social engineering. Engineered in the last half-decade of the 1940s, the new quiet war machine stood, so to speak, in sparkling gold-plated hardware on the showroom floor of 1954. With the creation of the maser, which is a type of microwave radiation beam, in 1954, the promise of unlocking unlimited sources of fusion atomic energy from the heavy hydrogen in seawater and the consequent availability of unlimited social power was a possibility only decades away. The combination was irresistible. The Quiet War was quietly declared by the international elite at a meeting held in 1954. Although the silent weapons system was nearly exposed 13 years later, the evolution of the new weapon system has never suffered any major setbacks. This volume marks the 25th anniversary of the beginning of the Quiet War. Already this domestic war has had many victories on many fronts throughout the world. Political introduction. In 1954, it was well recognized by those in positions of authority that it was only a matter of time, only a few decades, before the general public would be able to grasp and upset the cradle of power. For the very elements of the new silent weapon technology were as accessible for a public utopia as they were for providing a private utopia. The issue of primary concern, that of dominance, revolved around the subject of the energy sciences. Energy. Energy is recognized as the key to all activity on Earth. Natural science is the study of the sources and control of natural energy, and social science, theoretically expressed as economics, is the study of the sources and control of social energy. Both are bookkeeping systems, mathematics. Therefore, mathematics is the primary energy science, and the bookkeeper can be king if the public can be kept ignorant of the methodology of the bookkeeping. All science is merely a means to an end. The means is knowledge, the end is control. Beyond this remains only one issue: who will be the beneficiary? In 1954, this was the issue of primary concern. Although the so-called moral issues were raised in view of the law of natural selection, it was agreed that a nation or world of people who will not use their intelligence are no better than animals who do not have intelligence. Such people are beasts of burden and stakes on the table by choice and consent. Consequently, in the interest of future world order, peace, and tranquility, it was decided to privately wage a quiet war against the American public with an ultimate objective of permanently shifting the natural and social energy or wealth of the undisciplined and irresponsible many into the hands of the self-disciplined, responsible, and worthy few. In order to implement this objective, it was necessary to create, secure, and apply new weapons, which, as it turned out, were a class of weapons so subtle and sophisticated in their principle of operation and public appearance as to earn for themselves the name silent weapons. In conclusion, the objective of economic research as conducted by the magnates of capital, banking, and the industries of commodities, goods, and services is the establishment of an economy which is totally predictable and manipulatable. In order to achieve a totally predictable economy, the low-class elements of the society must be brought under total control, i.e. must be housebroken, trained, and assigned a yoke and long-term social duties from a very early age before they have an opportunity to question the propriety of the matter. In order to achieve such conformity, the lower-class family unit must be disintegrated by a process of increasing preoccupation of the parents and the establishment of government-operated daycare centers for the occupationally orphaned children. The quality of education given to the lower class must be of the poorest sort, so that the mote of the ignorance isolating the inferior class from the superior class is and remains incomprehensible to the inferior class. With such an initial handicap, even bright lower-class individuals have little, if any, hope of extricating themselves from their assigned lot in life. This form of slavery is essential to maintaining some measure of social order, peace, and tranquility for the ruling upper class. Descriptive introduction of the silent weapon. Everything that is expected from an ordinary weapon is expected from a silent weapon by its creators, but only in its own manner of functioning. It shoots situations instead of bullets, propelled by data processing instead of chemical reaction, explosion, originating from bits of data instead of grains of gunpowder, from a computer instead of a gun, operated by a computer programmer instead of a marksman, under the orders of a banking magnate instead of a military general. It makes no obvious explosive noises, causes no obvious physical or mental injuries, and does not obviously interfere with anyone's daily social life. Yet it makes an unmistakable noise, causes unmistakable physical and mental damage, and unmistakably interferes with daily social life, i.e. unmistakable to a trained observer, one who knows what to look for. The public cannot comprehend this weapon and therefore cannot believe that they are being attacked and subdued by a weapon. The public might instinctively feel that something is wrong, but because of the technical nature of the silent weapon, they cannot express their feeling in a rational way or handle the problem with intelligence. Therefore, they do not know how to cry for help and do not know how to associate with others to defend themselves against it. When a silent weapon is applied gradually, the public adjusts or adapts to its presence and learns to tolerate its encroachment on their lives until the pressure, psychological by economic, becomes too great and they crack up. Therefore, the silent weapon is a type of biological warfare. It attacks the vitality, options, and mobility of the individuals of a society by knowing, understanding, manipulating, and attacking their sources of natural and social energy, and their physical, mental, and emotional strengths and weaknesses. Theoretical introduction. Give me control over a nation's currency, and I care not who makes its laws. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, 1743 to 1812. Today's silent weapons technology is an outgrowth of a simple idea discovered, succinctly expressed, and effectively applied by the quoted Mr. Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Mr. Rothschild discovered the missing passive component of economic theory known as economic inductance. He, of course, did not think of his discovery in these 20th century terms, and to be sure, mathematical analysis had to wait for the Second Industrial Revolution, the rise of the theory of mechanics and electronics, and finally the invention of the electronic computer, before it could be effectively applied in the control of a world economy. General energy concepts. In the study of energy systems, there always appear three elementary concepts. These are potential energy, kinetic energy, and energy dissipation. Corresponding to these concepts, there are three idealized, essentially pure physical counterparts called passive components. 1. In the science of physical mechanics, the phenomenon of potential energy is associated with a physical property called elasticity or stiffness and can be represented by a stretched spring. In electronic science, potential energy is stored in a capacitor instead of a spring. This property is called capacitance instead of elasticity or stiffness. 2. In the science of physical mechanics, the phenomenon of kinetic energy is associated with a physical property called inertia or mass and can be represented by a mass or a flywheel in motion. In electronic science, kinetic energy is stored in an inductor in a magnetic field instead of a mass. This property is called inductance instead of inertia. 3. In the science of physical mechanics, the phenomenon of energy dissipation is associated with a physical property called friction or resistance and can be represented by a dashpot or other device which converts system energy into heat. In electronic science, dissipation of energy is performed by an element called either a resistor or a conductor, the term resistor being the one generally used to express the concept of friction, and the term conductor being generally used to describe a more ideal device, e.g. wire, employed to convey electronic energy efficiently from one location to another. The property of a resistance or conductor is measured as either resistance or conductance reciprocals. In economics, these three energy concepts are associated with economic capacitance, or capital, money, stock, inventory, investments in buildings and durables, etc. Economic conductance, goods, production flow coefficients. Economic inductance, services, the influence of the population of industry on output. All of the mathematical theory developed in the study of one energy system, e.g. mechanics, electronics, etc., can be immediately applied in the study of any other energy system, e.g. economics. Mr. Rothschild's energy discovery. What Mr. Rothschild had discovered was the basic principle of power, influence, and control over people as applied to economics. That principle is, when you assume the appearance of power, people soon give it to you. Mr. Rothschild had discovered that currency or deposit loan accounts had the acquired appearance of power that could be used to induce people, inductance with people corresponding to a magnetic field, into surrendering their real wealth in exchange for a promise of greater wealth instead of real compensation. They would put up real collateral in exchange for a loan of promissory notes. Mr. Rothschild found that he could issue more notes that he had backing for so long as he had someone's stock of gold as a persuader to show to his customers. Now, this is very common conspiracy theory material here, and you can see the connections from that in this document, and why, if these were the conspirators who wrote the document, they would speak about themselves in this manner makes no sense to me. Mr. Rothschild loaned his promissory notes to individuals and to governments. These would create overconfidence. Then he would make money scarce, tighten control of the system, and collect the collateral through the obligation of contracts. The cycle was then repeated. These pressures could be used to ignite a war. Then he could control the availability of currency to determine who would win that war. That government which agreed to give him control of its economic system then got his support. Collection of debts was guaranteed by economic aid to the enemy of the debtor. The profit derived from this economic methodology made Mr. Rothschild all the more able to extend his wealth. He found that the public greed would allow currency to be printed by government order beyond the limits or inflation of backing in precious metal or the production of goods and services, gross national product, GNP. Now here you can start seeing that there's sort of some connections to other conspiracy material like this, such as the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which is also said to be a hoax or a forgery type document, which is something that is often claimed about all of these types of documents. But this is also one of the ways that critics of such material would then link all conspiracy material to anti-Semitism. So we continue here. Apparent capital as paper inductor. In this structure, credit, presented as a pure element called currency, has the appearance of capital, but is in fact negative capital. Hence it has the appearance of service, but is in fact indebtedness or debt. It is therefore an economic inductance instead of an economic capacitance, and if balanced in no other way, will be balanced in no other way, will be balanced by the negation of population through war or genocide. The total goods and services represent real capital called the gross national product, and currency may be printed up to this level and still represent economic capacitance. But currency printed beyond this level is subtractive, represents the introduction of economic inductance, and constitutes notes of indebtedness. War is therefore the balancing of the system by killing the true creditors, the public which we have taught to exchange true value for inflated currency, and falling back on whatever is left of the resources of nature and regeneration of those resources. Mr. Rothschild had discovered that currency gave him the power to rearrange the economic structure to his own advantage, to shift economic inductance to those economic positions which would encourage the greatest economic instability and oscillation. The final key to economic control had to wait until there was sufficient data and high-speed computing equipment to keep a close watch on the economic oscillations created by price shocking and excess paper energy credits or paper inductance inflation. And you can see from this, too, where this is going to lead is that whoever the author of the document is, or multiple authors are, is they're going to claim that there's going to be a need for a great reduction in the population, which ties this kind of conspiracy theory material into, say, eugenics or population control measures and things of that nature. Breakthrough. The aviation field provided the greatest evolution in economic engineering by way of the mathematical theory of shock testing. In this process, a projectile is fired from an airframe on the ground, and the impulse of the recoil is monitored by vibration transducers connected to the airframe and wired to chart recorders. By studying the echoes or reflections of the recoil impulse in the airframe, it is possible to discover critical vibrations in the structure of the airframe, which either vibrations of the engine or aeolian vibrations of the wings or a combination of the two might reinforce, resulting in a resonant self-destruction of the airframe in flight as an aircraft. From the standpoint of engineering, this means that the strengths and weaknesses of the structure of the airframe in terms of vibrational energy can be discovered and manipulated. Application in economics. To use this method of airframe shock testing in economic engineering, the prices of commodities are shocked and the public consumer reaction is monitored. The resulting echoes of the economic shock are interpreted theoretically by computers, and the psycho-economic structure of the economy is discovered. It is by this process that partial differential and difference matrices are discovered that define the family household and make possible its evaluation as economic industry. Then the response of the household to future shocks can be predicted and manipulated, and society becomes a well-regulated animal with its reins under the control of a sophisticated computer-regulated social energy bookkeeping system. Eventually, every individual element of the structure comes under computer control through a knowledge of personal preferences, such knowledge guaranteed by computer association of consumer preferences. Universal Product Code, UPC, the zebra stripe pricing codes on packages, that was something that people were totally obsessed with and freaked out about in the 1980s. For whatever reason, they thought this was going to be a method for, I guess, marking individual humans or something like that. With the identified consumers, identification by association with the use of a credit card, or later a permanent tattooed body number invisible under normal ambient illumination. That's what I was getting to. I actually hadn't even read that yet. The economic model. The Harvard Economic Research Project 1948 was an extension of World War II operations research. Its purpose was to discover the science of controlling an economy. At first, the American economy and then the world economy. It was felt that with sufficient mathematical foundation and data, it would be nearly as easy to predict and control the trend of an economy as to predict and control the trajectory of a projectile. Such has proven to be the case. Moreover, the economy has been transformed into a guided missile on target. The immediate aim of the Harvard Project was to discover the economic structure, what forces change that structure, how the behavior of the structure can be predicted, and how it can be manipulated. What was needed was a well-organized knowledge of the mathematical structures and interrelationships of investment, production, distribution, and consumption. To make a short story of it all, too late for that now, buddy. It was discovered that an economy obeyed the same laws as electricity, and that all of the mathematical theory and practical and computer know-how developed for the electronic field could be directly applied in the study of economics. This discovery was not openly declared, and its more subtle implications were and are kept a closely guarded secret. For example, that in an economic model, human life is measured in dollars, and that the electric spark generated when opening a switch connected to an active inductor is mathematically analogous to the initiation of a war. The greatest hurdle which theoretical economists faced was the accurate description of the household as an industry. This is a challenge because consumer purchases are a matter of choice, which in turn is influenced by income, price, and other economic factors. This hurdle was cleared in an indirect and statistically approximate way by an application of a shock testing to determine the current characteristics called current technical coefficients of a household industry. Finally, because problems in theoretical economics can be translated very easily into problems in theoretical electronics, and the solution translated back again, it follows that only a book of language translation and concept definition needed to be written for economics. The remainder could be gotten from standard works on mathematics and electronics. This makes the publication of books on advanced economics unnecessary and greatly simplifies project security. Industrial diagrams. An ideal industry is defined as a device which receives value from other industries in several forms and converts into one specific product for sales and distribution to other industries. It has several inputs and one output. What the public normally thinks of as one industry is really an industrial complex with several industries under one roof produce one or more products. 3 industrial classes. Industries fall into 3 categories or classes by type of output. Class 1, capital, resources. Class 2, goods, commodities, or use, dissipative. Class 3, services, action of population. Class 1 has 3 subclasses: nature, sources of energy and raw materials; government, printing of currency equal to gross national product, and inflation of currency in excess of the GNP. Banking, loaning of money for interest and extension of economic value through deposit loan accounts. Class 2, industries exist as producers of tangible or consumer dissipated products. This sort of activity is usually recognized and labeled by the public as an industry. Class 3 industries are those which have service rather than a tangible product as their output. These industries are called 1. Households and 2. Governments. Their output is human activity of a mechanical sort and their basis is population. So what I've done so far is I wanted to read elements of this document to you verbatim so you get a sense of the feel for the document overall. Now I'm going to skip ahead several pages because he continues in like manner with those sorts of descriptions and definitions and so on and so forth. But I'm going to get down here to this part where he starts talking about the personal input data and how the government would collect this information to begin to manipulate and control a population. So he lists here a short list of inputs, questions which can be answered. 1. What, when, where, how, why, who. General sources of information. 1. Telephone taps. 2. Surveillance. 3. Analysis of garbage. 4. Behavior of children in school. Standard of living by 1. Food. 2. Clothing. 3. Shelter. 4. Transportation. Social contacts. 1. Telephone. Itemized record of all calls. 2. Family. Marriage certificates, birth certificates, and so on. 3. Who are their friends, associates, etc. 4. What are their memberships in various organizations? 5. What's their political affiliation? The personal paper trail. Personal buying habits, i.e. personal consumer preferences. 1. Checking accounts. 2. Credit card purchases. 3. Tagged credit card purchases. The credit card purchase of products bearing the UPC codes. Assets. 1. Checking accounts, savings accounts, real estate, business, automobile, safety deposit at bank. 7. Stock market transactions. Liabilities, creditors, enemies, see legal enemies. 3. Loans. Government sources or ploys. 1. Welfare. 2. Social Security. 3. USDA surplus food. 4. Doles. 5. Grants. 6. Subsidies. The principle of this ploy, he says, is, or whoever the author is, the citizen will almost always make the collection of information easy if he can operate on the free sandwich principle of eat now and then pay later. Government sources via intimidation. 1. The IRS. 2. OSHA. 3. The census. 4. Several other government sources. Other government sources through surveillance of the U.S. mail. Habit patterns, programming, strengths and weaknesses. 1. Activities. What are their sports, hobbies, so on. 2. Legal. What are their fears? What are their angers? Their criminal record. 3. What are their hospital records, drug sensitivities, reaction to pain, etc. 4. Psychiatric records. What are their fears, angers, disgust, adaptability, reactions to stimuli, violence, suggestibility, and so on. Methods of coping, of adaptability, behavior. 1. Consumption of alcohol. 2. Consumption of drugs. 3. Entertainment consumption. 4. Religious factors influencing behavior. 5. Other methods of escaping from reality. Payment modus operandi. Pay on time. 1. Payment of telephone bills. 2. Energy purchases. 3. Water purchases. 4. Repayment of loans. 5. House payments. 6. Automobile payments. 7. Payments on credit cards. Political sensitivity. 1. Beliefs. 2. Contacts. 3. Position. 4. Strengths, weaknesses. 5. Projects, activities. Legal inputs for behavioral control. 1. Court records. 2. Police records. 3. Driving record. 4. Reports made to police. 5. Insurance information. 6. Anti-establishment acquaintances. National input information. Business sources via the IRS and so on. Prices of commodities. Sales. Investments. Stocks. Inventory. Production tools. Machinery. Buildings. Improvements. The stock market overall. Banks and credit bureaus. Credit information, payment information, miscellaneous sources, polls, surveys, publications, telephone records, energy and utility purchases. And I'll skip from there to another list where he has a table of strategies, which will go in the format of do this in order to get this. Keep the public ignorant, less public organization. Maintain access to control points for feedback to get required reaction to outputs. Create preoccupation, lower defenses, attack the family unit, control of the education of the young, give less cash and more credit and doles, more self-indulgence and more data. attack the privacy of the church, destroy faith in this sort of government. Social conformity, computer programming simplicity. Minimize the tax protest, maximum economic data, minimum enforcement problems. Stabilize the consent simplicity coefficients. Tighten control of variables, simpler computer input data. Establish boundary conditions, problem simplicity, solutions of differential and difference equations. Proper timing, less data shift and blurring. Maximum control, minimum resistance to control. Collapse of currency, destroy the faith of the American people in each other. It lists diversions as the primary strategy. Experience has proven that the simplest method of securing a silent weapon and gaining control of the public is to keep the public undisciplined and ignorant of basic systems principles on the one hand, while keeping them confused, disorganized, and distracted with matters of no real importance on the other hand. This is achieved by 1. Disengaging their minds, sabotaging their mental activities, providing a low-quality program of public education in mathematics, logic, systems design, and economics, and discouraging technical creativity. 2. Engaging their emotions, increasing their self-indulgence and their indulgence in emotional and physical activities by A. Unrelenting emotional affrontations and attacks, mental and emotional rape by way of a constant barrage of sex, violence, and wars in the media, especially the TV and newspapers. B. Giving them what they desire in excess, junk food for thought, and depriving them of what they really need. 3. Rewriting history and law and subjecting the public to the deviant creation, thus being able to shift their thinking from personal needs to highly fabricated outside priorities. These preclude their interest in a discovery of the silent weapons of social automation technology. The general rule is that there is profit in confusion. The more confusion, the more profit. Therefore, the best approach is to create problems and then offer these solutions. People who are familiar with conspiracy material will recognize this whole create problems to offer solutions dichotomy, which people have multiplied later into what they call the Hegelian dialectic, which is problem, reaction, solution. Create the problem, generate a reaction in the public, and then you offer your solution, which you wanted from the beginning. This is actually not what philosophers know of as the Hegelian dialectic, which Hegel said was there's a thesis which generates within it its own antithesis, because every idea bears the seed of its own destruction. So you have thesis, antithesis, and then that comes together later for a new synthesis. So what Hegel talked about had nothing whatsoever to do with problem, reaction, solution. It was thesis, antithesis, new synthesis. It's really a separate thing, especially when you consider it from purely philosophical perspectives. Diversion summary. Media. Keep the adult public attention diverted away from real social issues and captivated by matters of no real importance. That's actually a repeat. Schools. Keep the young public ignorant of real mathematics, economics, law, and history. Entertainment. Keep the public entertainment below a 6th grade level. I think they're doing a pretty good job of that if that's the goal. Work. Keep the public busy with no time to think. Back on the farm with the other animals. Consent. The primary victory. A silent weapon system operates upon data obtained from a docile public by legal but not always lawful force. Much information is made available to silent weapon systems programmers through the IRS. This information consists of the enforced delivery of well-organized data contained in the federal and state tax forms collected, assembled, and submitted by slave labor provided by taxpayers and employers. Furthermore, the number of such forms submitted to the IRS is a useful indicator of public consent, an important factor in strategic decision-making. Other data sources are given in the short list of inputs. Consent coefficients, numerical feedback indicating victory status, psychological basis, when the government is able to collect tax and seize private property without compensation, it is an indication that the public is ripe for surrender and is consenting to enslavement and legal encroachment. A good and easily quantified indicator of harvest time is the number of public citizens who pay income tax despite an obvious lack of reciprocal or honest service from the government. I also read that section so that those with keen ears would perk up a little bit and notice that there's several telltale signs in there that this document is not one to be taken particularly seriously. I think that this has to be some kind of a fraudulent or hoaxed document. It just does not bear the earmarks of credibility. Now, it may be that this matches some of the things that actually happened in reality, but that does not mean that this was a real serious document that was presented at the some kind of a Bilderberg group meeting or anything. So I'm going to skip down to another section here. Remember, they'll all be linked below so you can check them out yourself. Summary. The people hire the politicians so that people can obtain security without managing it, obtain action without thinking about it, inflict theft, injury, and death upon others without having to contemplate either life or death, avoid responsibility for their own intentions, obtain the benefits of reality and science without exerting themselves in the discipline of facing or learning either of these things. They give the politicians the power to create and manage a war machine in order to provide for the survival of the nation, prevent encroachment of anything upon the nation, destroy the enemy who threatens the nation, destroy those citizens of their own country who do not conform for the sake of stability of the nation. That's followed by a huge section on the military draft, and I'll move down to another section on enforcement, where it covers various what are called factors. Under father, it says, the man of the household must be housebroken to ensure that Junior will grow up with the right social training and attitudes. The advertising media, etc., are engaged to see to it that the father-to-be is, well, there's a word there, I can't read, whipped before or by the time he is married. He is taught that he either conforms to the social notch cut out for him, or his sex life will be hobbled and his tender companionship will be zero. He is made to see that women demand security more than logical, principled, or honorable behavior. By the time his son must go to war, father, with jelly for a backbone, will slam a gun into Junior's hand before father will risk the censure of his peers or make a hypocrite of himself by crossing the investment he has in his own personal opinion or self-esteem. Factor 3, mother. The female element of human society is ruled by emotion first and logic second. In the battle between logic and imagination, imagination always wins, fantasy prevails, maternal instinct dominates so that the child comes first and the future comes second. A woman with a newborn baby is too starry-eyed to see a wealthy man's cannon fodder or a cheap source of slave labor. A woman must, however, be conditioned to accept the transition to reality when it comes or sooner. As the transition becomes more difficult to manage, the family unit must be carefully disintegrated and state-controlled public education and state-operated child care centers must become more common and legally enforced so as to begin the detachment of the child from the mother and father at an early age. Inoculation of behavioral drugs can speed the transition for the child, which will be mandatory. Caution, a woman's impulsive anger can override her fear. An irate woman's power must never be underestimated, and her power over her pea-whipped husband, again, must likewise never be underestimated. Yeah, I can't seriously believe that people thought that this was real. Factor 4, Junior. The emotional pressure for self-preservation during time of war and the self-serving attitude of the common herd that have an option to avoid the battlefield if Junior can be persuaded to go. It is all of the pressure finally necessary to propel Johnny off to war. Their quiet blackmailings of him are the threats. No sacrifice, no friends, no glory, no girlfriends. Factor 5, sister. What about Junior's sister? She is given all the good things of life by her father and taught to expect the same from her future husband regardless of the price. Factor 6, cattle. Those who will not use their brains are no better off than those who have no brains, and so this mindless school of jellyfish, father, son, mother, and daughter, become useful beasts of burden or trainers of the same. Incidentally, the source from which I'm getting this particular reading says at the bottom, Behold a Pale Horse is an excellent source of information concerning the New World Order. I recommend it. And he gives a source where somebody could buy that book if they so wanted to. What can you say about this overall? I mean, this kind of Illuminati material, the Bilderberg Group material, and all this, obviously, we know the Bilderberg Group is real now. We know that Bohemian Grove is real, that these secret societies do have interlocking relationships between, say, Yale's Skull and Bones and Bohemian Grove. And, the list can just go on and on and on. The Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, and all this kind of stuff. And some of that skips over the actual disagreements that these people have with each other. They do have individual rivalries with one another. They don't always work together seamlessly in order to bring about the sort of global tyranny and destruction and all of this that's commonly talked about in these circles. Now, that is not at all to say that there are not lots of really, really bad actors out there that really are out to get us. It's just that the provenance of some of these documents, as you heard just in the short reading that I gave here, I know this is close to 45 minutes now, and it was not at all the whole document. I mean, this one is 23 pages that I have. There's another one that is another 20 plus pages that has all of the formula and equations and all of this sort of stuff, which I guess is supposed to be some kind of supporting material, but you can tell by the language in it otherwise that it is not as credible as some people would have you believe. It's actually quite questionable. And then we'll move from this in this episode to the next episode, where I'll talk about the report from Iron Mountain, which is even more dubious, but also interesting. I mean, I think it's worth covering just for a lot of different historical purposes that we should think about this kind of stuff. Anyway, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks.